Right, good afternoon everyone. So back again with Andy and his long-winded stories. um, so we'll talk today about the story of Virabhadrasana, which we know to mean or to refer to as a warrior pose. Now actually, like with many of the kind of stories behind the poses, but not all of them, this one goes a little deeper and actually a little further beyond just the warrior. And we've actually come to know that the kind of English translation doesn't really do it justice. It leads us to believe that the pose is named after the warrior, generally speaking, and it's this position or that position is representative of perhaps some sort of military, or has some sort of military implication or connotation, or it's to do with war or something like that. But it's a little bit deeper than that, and the story extends a little bit further, or rather beyond the kind of bounds of just this one story and into others, the story of Sati and Parvati, and the story of Daksha, who are all Hindu deities. And so in this kind of this tie to Hindu mythology, and again, this doesn't mean that all poses have a tie to Hindu mythology. They don't, not by any means. Some are actually named quite aptly so around the way in which they activate the body or the energy centres within the body, or ask the body to surrender or yield, and often have a tie to certain parts of the body as well, which we spoke about in the past. But when we're, from time to time, we're graced with a little myth or a little story, and we're led a little deeper down the track. And this one actually is, as far as I'm aware, has got Vedic roots, so it's very old. But of course, as always, it's open to interpretation, and there are aspects of it that's likely to have changed very much so over the centuries or the millennia. So it's just an interpretation of the story, but as always, the message is what remains clear, right? So in this scenario, this is really a story, as opposed to it being about war and the story of the warrior, it's much more to do with love, as always. And it's really a time for when love kind of was tied to or chose devotion over approval, And so we hear about one of the deities, Sati, who represents devotion. She's this kind of divine personification in many ways of raw love, very raw, powerful embodiment of love and devotion and sacrifice as well. And she's the daughter of this very proud king who is known among the Hindu deities as this kind of lawgiver god, Daksha. And he was responsible for hosting the yajna. And the yajna are these, or would have been these ceremonial sacrificial fires, these Hindu fires that are burning. And it's all very symbolic, these fires, very symbolic. There's all this ash as well, this ritualistic ash, which we know has got ties to Vibhuti, it's called. And it's got ties to Shiva as well, because he used to adorn his body in that. And anyway, so this kind of sacrificial rite was that of Daksha, the father of Sati. And Sati had fallen head over heels in love with Shiva, despite his unorthodox ways and his unorthodox appearance. He used to go and do his thing and cover himself in ash and practice yoga and do his dance, and he was frowned upon by Daksha. He wasn't, who didn't approve of him, not in the slightest, for his daughter. And one day he hosts this great yajna and invites all the gods except for Shiva, which is like a major mug-off, obviously. Now Sati, really out of respect and for her own dignity, attends this do. She's not happy about it, but she attends. And despite her other half not being invited, simply because he's different, he lives, if you like, on the outside. He was on the outskirts, and he didn't function in the same way as the other deities. He was sort of living beyond convention, and that was a bit frowned upon, particularly by his father-in-law, or who became his father-in-law, this Daksha. And so Daksha didn't understand this union between Parvati and Sati and Shiva, and he just completely disapproved of it. And so at this yajna, he essentially, behind Shiva's back, he insults him and he mugs him off, because he's this kind of wild, unrefined, unworthy man in Daksha's eyes. And so this is why he wasn't invited in the first place. And you know, he wants better for his daughter. But through almost deep insult, you know, Sati's turned up, not as a queen or anything like that, or a princess or whatever, but as a daughter, you know, kind of seeking dignity and the respect of her father, going anyway. And instead she faces his scorn, right? And she hears him speaking harshly of Shiva and mocking him in front of all the, you know, this massive gathering, in front of all of these deities that have turned up to this do. And at that moment, something in Sati breaks, right? Because she represents this raw, unrefined love, this complete devotion to Shiva. And so, not out of weakness, but rather out of this fierce, unwavering love, unable to bear this dishonour, this great dishonour, because she completely reveres Shiva. You know, she's the other half. He's this divine masculinity. She's this embodiment of Shakti, this divine feminine energy that is, you know, that has given movement and animation to the entire universe. She steps into this sacrificial fire and she releases her body and her bond, you know, to her body. She ends it. And of course, this causes almost an epic kind of ripple through space and time. And Shiva feels this end. He feels this instant transformation that happens. And this grief didn't kind of fall quietly on Shiva. It arrived like a storm that kind of tears mountains from their roots. You know, it was this insane upheaval for Shiva. And in his grief and in his anguish, he grabs a lock of his hair, and his hair was a very symbolic, and it had these deep, sort of very symbolic, very powerful, a great symbol of power his hair was, because there's a separate story about him channeling the kind of the great river of the cosmos into his hair to stop the world from drowning. And there are lots of little stories like that, right? And that's I digress there, so I won't go down that one. But he tears a lock of his hair from his head and he throws it to the ground in grief and in anguish. And it's this symbol of this immense contained power, you know, that he holds in his hand, and he casts it to the earth. And as he does so, the ground trembles, you know, the floor ripples and stones rise from the earth. And as it does so, from this impact with this lock of hair, rises this being that's forged out of fury and purpose and intent and focus and clarity. And this was Virabhadra. So a kind of incarnation, or almost an avatar of Shiva. And he rises from the ground, both his swords piercing the earth, standing in this powerful, rooted in purpose, you know, with clear direction, rooted, you know, through the hills, through the ground, but with his swords outstretched towards the sky, his head gazing skywards towards the heavens in acknowledgement of the divinity as well of Shiva, rises this Virabhadra. And he doesn't hesitate. He rises, and as sudden as he rises, you know, he as he lifts his gaze, he turns his gaze now towards Daksha, across the horizon. You know, no building, no mountain, no tree will obstruct this path. He sees beyond, through, with a focus that's unrivaled, right, and precise and unwavering. You know, and his swords, he stretches out his swords before him as he aims. And we know about in Warrior 2, which is this position, our drishti and the focus and the aim visually, the way that we focus beyond the fingertip, beyond the tip of our sword, that we're now, actually we know we're aiming for Daksha, yeah? So he aims across, you know, toward the horizon where Daksha is at this yajna. And obviously in this pose of clarity and direction and you know, this like hair breadth thin line between action and consequence now, you know, this moment between him rising to this challenge and before him executing this task, this attack, this you know, whatever you want to call it. There's this, we're on this precipice of action now with great focus and great clarity. And he moves, of course he moves, he attacks, and with balance and control and absolute focus, he performs the warrior three. He surges forwards, not chaotically or what's the word? Sort of messily and candidly. He strikes with perfect execution and clarity. And this strike, this extension of Shiva's will is now executed and put into full action and completion. Like he lobs Daksha's head clean off of his shoulders, and Virabhadra in this single moment fulfills his purpose to dismantle this kind of arrogance and the indignity as well, and imbalance that has led to Sati's destruction, right? And it is imbalanced because Sati was this divine, she was the counterpart, the other half, this divine, the embodiment of Shakti. So, it was this huge imbalance that was caused. And obviously, like with a lot of Hindu myths, there's like murder and drama and all of this involved. But it's not really a story of that ends in violence and of violence. It's a story of transformation, because later on, actually, and we don't need to worry too much about Daksha because he's it's not his end. I think Shiva, or somehow he ends up with a goat's head on his shoulders, and he's sweet as a nut. He's back to life and he's doing his thing with the head of a goat, so he's cool. So we ain't got to worry too much about him. But Sati's reborn later as Parvati, and Parvati is very different to Sati because she's not led by this kind of raw devotional love. Instead, she meditates and she's disciplined. She exercises tapas. And Parvati, known as the daughter of the mountains, her love is refined. It's fierce, but it's refined, and it's through practice and discipline and tapas and this deep kind of inner integrity and strength. She returns to Shiva, no longer in this innocent form as Sati, but rather as this mature, established, refined form, Parvati. She returns to Shiva, and she's no longer seeking validation, not from Shiva nor from her father, but instead she returns as this equal, this not irrevocable, but this equal force, this power, this unrivaled power that is Shiv. She is the equal, the complete equal, embodied and grounded and completely awakened, just like Shiva as the Adi Yogi, she is the Adi Shakti, And so we're reminded through that, and obviously their union is the outcome, And we're reminded through that Sati is raw devotion, that Parvati is refined devotion, And Sati obviously it represents sacrifice as well, great sacrifice, in as a bid or on the journey, as part of this journey of transformation towards this refined devotion, and that Shiva is pure consciousness, and Shakti which in the end, as Parvati, in the form of Parvati, is the force that kind of moves that pure consciousness, the unifying force that moves that consciousness. So we see with this story, like the warrior is not kind of born from Shiva's anger necessarily, although he is angry, of course, and he wants recompense for this indignity that he suffered and this dishonour and this great tragedy that's befallen him, because obviously Sati's ended her life and stepped into this sacrificial fire, and this raw, beautiful love that they shared has been abruptly brought to a halt, But this kind of, the warrior is brought forth not from anger, but from clarity and from focus and from a sense of great purpose, purpose that extends beyond actually just the will of Shiva, but rather it's about justice, and it's about balance and harmony and unity, and about love as opposed to just anger alone. And so this journey from Sati to Parvati kind of reminds us that love in any form, right, when it's refined through practice and through discipline and through devotion, becomes a great power, a great clarity, and a great union that is undeniable and unquestionable. So there we go. There you have it. There's the story of Virabhadra. It's also a little bit the story of Sati and Parvati, and Shiva as well. But that's it in a nutshell. Yeah. So isn't that nice? there you go. Have a lovely afternoon. Sending love from Hungary, and looking forward to catching up with you all soon. Ciao for now.